Good evening, and welcome to Parsons School of Design at the New School. Thank you all for joining us for this special installment of the Stephen Weiss Lecture Series, a prestigious and endowed event series focused on design strategy, social responsibility, and engaging with complex global challenges. Made possible by Karen Weiss Foundation, Donna Karen, Gabrielle Karen, Corey Weiss, and Lisa Weiss. It features industry and academic leaders discussing topics like design, technology, and social change. Tonight's lecture offers a rare opportunity to reflect on the evolving role of design over time, how it shapes not only the products and systems around us, but also the ways we collaborate, communicate, and address complex challenges. At a moment of rapid and technological and cultural changes, what does it mean to be a designer? Conversation tonight can remind us the enduring value that define meaningful design practices are anchored in empathy, curiosity, and a commitment to making a positive differences. To begin, it's my pleasure to introduce a leader who embodies these values and continues to guide Parsons at the forefront of design education. Please join me in welcoming Ann Gaines, Executive Dean of Parsons School of Design at the New School.
Thank you so much. It is my pleasure to give you all such a warm welcome tonight. We are kicking off 55 years in design. What changes? What doesn't? This is part of the 2026 Stephen Weiss Lecture Series presented by the School of Design Strategies at Parsons. And over the past 55 years, the practice of design has been rapidly transformed by new technologies, new methodologies, and new platforms. And yet the most important principles that guide the most meaningful work remain constant: that collaboration, empathy, and leadership. Tonight, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce designers and longtime creative partners, Michael, Donovan, and Nancye. They established in the 1970s a brand and design consultancy, Donovan and Green, and over the course of their careers, they have advised leaders across media, technology, healthcare, finance, consumer industries, helping organizations navigate transformation through design, communication, and strategy. And yet, while doing that, concurrently, they've been deeply engaged in design education and leadership within the profession. Michael and Nancye have shown long-standing dedication and commitment to supporting Parsons students, generously offering up their advice and time with future design leaders. You will often see them present here at end of year, at exhibition, maybe at performances last night, all the way from our pre-college programs to our graduate students, mentoring and supporting scholarships in all kinds of venues. As Parsons alumni themselves, they represent those who are truly present for our students and the future of the institution. And I am so fortunate to have known Michael and Nancye for the last 15 years through my time when I was a school dean for art, media, and technology. We had the chance to go and visit our affiliate institution, Chavon, together in the Dominican Republic. And that was a chance to really roll up our sleeves and focus on design and students and learning. And now, as I sit beside Michael as he chairs the Board of Governors for Parsons, we're doing the same thing. We're just in a same setting, working a different way at a new time. And so I think while we handily recognize all of that contribution and all of that influence, it is also recognized in the industry. They have, their contributions to design and visual communication were awarded the AIGA Medal, the profession's highest honor. Together, Michael and Nancye bring a distinctive perspective shaped by decades of partnership as collaborators, entrepreneurs, and advocates for the broader role of design in shaping business, culture, and society. All right, let's wrap it up. Let's get them up here. Tonight, you will hear from them as they explore the fundamental principles of collaboration that are imperative to becoming successful designers. They will also discuss their view of the rapidly changing technological landscape and emergences of artificial intelligence as an opportunity for designers to become leaders in addressing the issues that matter most. I want to extend my sincere gratitude to Michael and Nancye for this evening. Welcome, and join me in welcoming them up here.
In order to keep ourselves disciplined, we decided to structure some slides. We didn't originally, but we didn't know we would just be rambling. So we have to stand here because we have to look at what we're doing. So we thought we'd start with who we are. I think this says it all, don't you? For those of you who know us. Michael, do you want to start with?
Yeah. Well, clearly, I'm more linear than Nancye. And that is true. But we thought it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about our origins because, like many of you in this room, speaking for myself, I started out, I grew up in a small town in Iowa, where the pathways for what you're going to do next were fairly limited. And so I did the obvious thing, kid living in Iowa, and I went to Iowa State University and studied veterinary medicine. I was going to be a vet. And so I was well on my way. I have a master, I got a degree in Bachelor of Science in veterinary medicine. And I realized that wasn't what I wanted to do. And somehow I found Parsons School of Design. I have no damn idea. Before the internet, I don't even know if they were printing newspapers back then. But somehow the drumbeat found its way to me, and I think I took my first plane ride to New York with a rat-ass portfolio. That's that little dotted line there. And got out of the plane and never came back. So here we are. And Nancye had a little different journey.
So I'm an Army brat. I was born in Monterey, California. My father was at the Japanese language school. I then moved to Japan for a few years, and then to Texas for a year, and then to Germany. And because the Army never sent you where you had any expertise. So he spoke, read, and wrote Japanese, so they sent him to Germany. So he went to Germany and then came back to Oklahoma briefly, where my family's from, and then moved to Kansas, and then back to Oklahoma, where my parents got their MBAs, and then to Washington, where I got my high school degree, and then to New Orleans, where I went to Tulane, and came to New York with a fellowship guaranteed at Columbia in urban studies. That was my major. And I arrived at the Columbia campus the same time the strike happened. And I just decided, I don't want to teach, I don't want to write. So why am I getting a PhD in political science? And I went and got Gopher jobs. You know what those are, right? You get the coffee. And the last one I had was in a design firm, a small design firm by the name of Forbes Urgis. Some of you may know that name, or most of you don't. Susan Forbes taught at Parsons in interior design. And I thought what they did was spectacular. So I said, maybe I could go to design school. So I didn't have a portfolio at all. And they gave me these little drawing exercises. You draw your face and you draw something else. And I showed up and they said, well, I don't know, but since you were Phi Beta Kappa at Tulane, maybe we'll let you into Parsons. Anyway, I went through Parsons for 3 full-time years. I started all over again, and it changed my life. When I saw the Bob Dylan movie, Michael and I both said, that was our New York. 1968 is when I moved to New York. Went to Parsons from 70, 73, and it was extraordinary. It was a time where everything was changing. The department was no longer called interior design, it was called environmental design. we study everything except interior design. We studied architecture, industrial design with this incredible man by the name of Bill Catawalus, who some of you may remember, photography. We did everything except interior design. So I got out of school completely still incapable of getting a job. You know, political science degree, no job. Environmental design degree, no job. And so Michael and I started Donovan and Green because that's all. What else are you going to do?
When you're unemployed,
Right,
obviously the only thing to do is start your own company.
He wasn't. He'd been at Unimark and then with the Vignelli office. I mean, the Vignellis became our godparents. But anyway, we started Donovan and Green. And over the years, we came from a very literate, scientifically oriented backgrounds, and we really loved information and information design. So we started doing museum exhibits at the Museum of Natural History and on volcanoes and on maps, and we did a lot of things that were content rich. Our first huge client was Exxon, and we did an R&D symposium for them around the world talking about R&D technology in like cleaning up oil spills and things like that. And we were in heaven. We were designing slideshows and productions around the world in like 15 countries, and including the Middle East. And all that work, that sort of beginning work, sort of led to this belief that we could learn how to do just about anything, except reflected ceiling lamps. Michael knew how to do the light bulb. So anyway, we then. We thought that tonight we were going to do two things. We didn't want to do a portfolio presentation because those are boring. But we did think that seeing some work was probably important since we were very visual people. I want to say before we start that we thought we'd have a lot of students, and I think we have actually more professors than we have students. But we really thought we wanted to do this for students. What we've learned, what we've made, what might be useful for you, and what would you like, and then we'll sit down and you'll tell us what you'd like to know. I think one of the things that is important to say is that in all the things that we're going to show you, it represents probably 25% of our work, because a lot of it didn't end up in a thing. Two of my biggest clients were P&G and GM. And for GM, Richard Werman and I were asked to look at the language that could bridge the gap between the marketing department, which was thousands of people and spending millions of dollars, and the designers who never looked at the marketing department's work. So that's where you get, if you remember, some of you who are old enough, the Time magazine article with 5 red cars on it that were different brands that all looked alike. And they really wanted to figure out how can we create a bridging language. So we worked on that. For P&G, I was on the Global Design Board for 15 years, and we looked at how do you knit together all the channels of a brand so that they have the same personality, language, feel, whatever. So a lot of that stuff wasn't about making things. It was about really thinking about design, and I think that's important. It's important for our careers because I think we spend a lot of time trying to think about, what is the problem we're solving.
So one of the things we learned is that, and this was very early on, is that story was everything. And as Nancye said, some of the earliest work that we did was exhibition design, where we were learning about as Nancye mentioned, volcanoes, or we did an amazing exhibition, amazing in terms of the learning on maps. Both at the American Museum of Natural History, we did a huge exhibition that toured the country, sponsored by the Smithsonian, on Hollywood Legend Reality. And that storytelling sort of thread, we realized was a driver for almost everything we did. And the other thing that became abundantly clear is that we were living in a very complex world. A lot of the projects that we're dealing with, we had to bring our ability to simplify to the problem. And especially when we were dealing with scientific stuff, like for Exxon, where we were talking about very complicated scientific processes. And we would sit down with a most gratifying experience, have designers sitting with scientists and passing a pencil back and forth across a piece of paper. And the scientists going, oh my gosh, that's right. They're seeing something visualized for the first time, and they hand it to their 8-year-old, and the 8-year-old go, oh, I get it, Dad. Or they get handed to the president of the company, and he'd say, oh, I get it. So for the first time. So as part of that learning and as part of the work that we're doing, particularly with companies like Exxon, we realized we had to embrace technologies. And so Nancye and I, at one point, we owned one of the first commercially available computers. It was an Eagle, about this big, and programmed on a floppy disk about this big. And we had a guy named Alan Sherrod that was entering code that would pulse projectors, because we were doing multimedia presentations. There were 24 projectors on 3 screens, the scale of Charles Eames's projects for the World Trade Centers.
World Fairs.
World Fairs, yeah. And we did that for Exxon, we did it for Corning, we did
IBM.
it for IBM. So we had, as kids, we had these really big relationships. And what went along with that, in order to be successful, we had to work with the CEO, we had to work with the president, chairman, to help them get their story across. So that was another lesson that we learned early on, which was where you worked and where you had the relationship. And so the last point was, we realized that we had maybe one of the greatest jobs on the planet, because we were getting paid to be curious. We were really getting paid to have fun. And I think that early learning has been an ingredient for the last 50 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what we're going to show you the first piece of work, right?
Right.
And just as Nancye mentioned, it's worth noting that this is the tip of the iceberg. And most of the work that you're going to see, with the exception of Ferris Bueller poster.
And if anyone wants to talk to you about working in Hollywood, which only lasted about a year, we did 3 movies, and I said, never again. I don't like the key art.
In Hollywood, the agent's girlfriend's cat
has an opinion, right? Anyway.
But so the work that's all the way, that you'll see all the way through, it's really work that in almost every case, the relationship was 5, 10, even 15 years long.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So,
And I will say one other thing. We learned a very hard lesson a very hard way, which is that we were doing a huge 100-some-odd projector slideshow for a big tech company, and we were working in the middle of the stack, and we sweated. When you program these shows, this particular show is 8 minutes long. You program them in a day. I mean, and there's slides. You're making little slides that are all. It's miserable production work. And we got a call from our client on the Friday, I think, before a long weekend, saying, my boss hates it. And we said, okay, that's it, we're done. No more middle of the stack clients. And we actually, in our late 20s, early 30s, we stopped working with big companies for about 10 years. And we only worked with small companies. $60 million of revenue. That's how we ended up, to some degree, in the contract furniture industry. Is they love design. We could work with the CEOs of these small companies, and we could make a difference and see the sales grow. And we decided that this is where we need to be, because no one's going to take us seriously. By the time we sold our company in 2000, we were working with the CEOs of P&G and GM, but it took us a long time to get back up that ladder. And learning to work with decision makers was our first sort of nasty shot across the bow. So this is the first grouping. So early lessons. Is this you or me?
I don't remember.
Oh. You want to take it?
Sure, why not? I want to say one other thing about So what you just saw was pretty much 55 years of interaction there. Pretty consistent. One of the things that people have asked us frequently, how is it possible that you guys worked together, had a business together, raised 2 children, for all that time? And one of the reasons is we were rarely in the same room together. Makes a big difference. But seriously, I mean, we would meet somebody for the first time, and you know, we talk our talk or whatever. But then leadership was really clearly assigned, right? And so it was Nancye's project or my project, and in many ways, the other counterparty kind of always had the last look, you know. And I would often, what do you think of this? You know, I never went to Nancye about color because we don't agree with that at all.
Ever.
You know? This red is probably the only thing we've ever agreed with when it comes to palette. But you know, the trust that we had for each other in terms of judgment and sort of our shared values is beautiful. So, but it made things very easy on the other side as well, because they knew that they were working with Nancye, they knew they were working with me. You know, it's not like if Nancye would come in early and if we were both working with the same, they'd call Nancye in the morning and then they'd call me late at night, and you get 2 different answers. So this way there was complete clarity. And so that kind of led to this notion of shared values. And one of the things that we realized, Nancye mentioned earlier, that we curated who we worked with. That became kind of a critical ingredient in our business decisions. And as Nancye mentioned, we worked with companies like Raquel and Herman Miller, where we could work with the CEO. And because we felt that for us to be successful, we really had to see the counterparty as a partner, and they had to see us as a partner, value what we provided, and we shared their interest in making their business successful. And so that ethos carried through both in terms of externally and also internally. The people that worked with us were wonderful people. Randall made a comment earlier about the Nancye office was like a party, you know, and in many ways, the work that we were doing was hard, and it was late at night. And, you know, as I said, it's more fun to be working late at night if you're with kindred spirits. And in that context, we had to learn how to be good collaborators, because the skill sets that were in resident, because our projects were so broad, and the focus really, we had to bring expertise to the problem. So we had a diverse group of people sitting around the table, and there was no kind of classic design hierarchy where, you know, it sort of starts at the top, and maybe that was an old-fashioned idea of architecture. But, you know, but a lot of the good ones, that was it, and it sort of filtered down. I think our organization was very flat, and I think that reflects now more how people work in general. And I think technology has accelerated that and made it more possible, but it was an important ingredient for us. And then finally, this notion of trust. And I mean, trust is earned, and we earned it. And you know, we worked hard, but we always saw that what our mission was, and we were clear about that. And
yeah, and I think that one of the things that for students in particular, you know, we had people come to work for us and they were prima donnas. You know, they had total control as a student over everything in their project. And they get their first job and they say, what do you mean the client doesn't like it? It's beautiful. You know, and the reality is that this notion of learning how to collaborate, which we thought was important back then because we did so many, as Mike said, diverse projects, it's even more important now, because we're all, if we're going to do well and do important things, we're going to be working with lots of different kinds of people. And we're going to be working across subject matter we know nothing about. And its subject matter has gotten more and more and more particular. And that notion of how do you learn how to collaborate, I know that there's a lot of teamwork, you know, that happens, but there couldn't be enough. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, as far as we're concerned, our office was like lots of teams and lots of humility.
You know, there was another aspect we were talking about. I mean, the one thing about this talk was it gave us a chance to be reflective, and that was interesting. You know, I mean, we sort of started digging through some of the war stories or past histories, and one of the things that probably should have mentioned this in the origins aspect of it, but one of the things that Nancye and I did that I think is really important is we really engaged with our community from the very beginning. You know, in some respects, I think it started with Massimo. He was so passionate about like the AIGA, you know, and I would tag along and we'd go to the AIG meetings, and it was a smaller community. It was clearly a peer group, but you learned a lot. You know, I mean, it was really sitting around a campfire in a sense, kind of with the elders, and that behavior became consistent. We were involved with AIGA. We were involved with the African Design Conference. We were involved, very importantly, with the very first TED. I mean, Nancye and I were part of TED from day one, really. Nancye's on Richard's advisory board.
I mean, that really, those three experiences, Aspen, Massimo called me one day. I remember where I have the worst memory in the world, but I know exactly where I was, and Massimo called me and said, "Would you be president of the AIGA?" Similarly, I was lying in bed after surgery, and Milton called me and said, "Would you be president of the Aspen Design Conference?" And these stepping stones in our career changed our lives. I mean, going to TED every year felt like from 84 to 2000, which was such an incredible time, where all the people who showed up, I think you went a number of times, all the people who showed up, you kind of knew where the world was going after a TED. You felt like you were just drinking in, you know, currency, you know, by being in that room. And I think that there are a lot of places to go now, and there are a lot of peer groups, but I think that finding your peers, finding the people who really are smarter than you are, is the ones that, if you think you're the smartest person in the room, you're not in the right room.
You need a bigger room.
You need a bigger room. And I think that notion of really trying to surround yourself with the smartest people in the room is really important. So another little journey into visuals. As Michael said, we had no short projects, so like anybody who does work, and many designers in the room, there are 1,000 stories to each one of these. So designers are makers, and we need to make sense. I think one of the things that, again, was abundantly clear to us almost from the beginning was people would come in and say, "I need a brochure," and we would always ask, "Why? You know, why do you think you need a brochure?" And I think so much of making is amazing, and makers are, I mean, I'm not one of those people. So I really admire people who actually make things. And I think it is really important, and we as designers sometimes forget that the things we do are not for us. You know, they are, if we were artists, I mean, there are artists, and that's what you set the problem, you solve the problem. But when you're doing a design project, the kind of work we did, it's never for us, it's for somebody else. And really understanding who it's for and what the problem really is. I remember when I was involved with Interpublic for a few years, I remember someone who was really smart in the room said, I'm so tired of people solving the wrong problem precisely. And I think there is that tendency that you fall in love with a solution, forget about whether it's the right solution. So, what is the problem we are really solving? What are the constraints and what are the opportunities? And how do we know if we succeeded? Before you even start, how will we know if we succeeded? And I think we disciplined ourselves a lot around that from the beginning. Another one of these.
Designers need to be curators of intelligence. But one of the things that we were compelled to be is integrators, because we had so many skills embedded in our organization. We had to bring in additional ring of skills that we realized that our ability to kind of be the interface, both for our partners, external partners, but for our internal partners. And today I think that this is even a more compelling idea, because as technology moves at an extraordinary rapid pace, we really need to be leaders in this, and we really have to be the guides to help all the people that we interact with navigate this universe that is not sort of monofocused anymore. It's really this blend of technical, cultural, and emotion. And so this notion of the languages that you need to have mastery of, technology, culture, interpersonal, these are all really critical skills in terms of leadership. And I think one of the things that we believe sincerely is that the technology that is rapidly advancing is going to eliminate the necessity for production, but it's not going to alter the need for design and designers, because they will play those roles. We need you step up in terms of leadership and be the guide that helps navigate this rapidly changing world.
Yeah, I mean, I was in a board meeting the last 2 days, and this incredible CEO, probably one of the best I've ever seen in the seat, said, I used to make a 2-year plan and think, I don't know if it's going to be this, will it change? So now I have a 3-month plan, because what is happening in every part of the business is so disrupted by AI. And their board members said, it's not big, it's a bubble, right? It's not, my opinion, it's not that it's going to miraculously make everything better. It's not that. It's that having our hands on these tools and having all of the capability and opportunities that this brings to us means that we have to step up so that we are the orchestrators. We are the conductor of the orchestra. We're not the hands doing the work. We're not, can you design me a brochure anymore? We're going to try to help people who have health problems overcome their health problems. How are we going to do that? We met a student last week or the week before, whenever we did this, who designed this living Band-Aid, or this living bandage. It's not a bandage, that's correct. Living bandage. And I was just blown away by the fact that someone can come out of this place and really rethink the fundamentals of a problem that is a real problem. And I think there will be more and more problems that we're able to solve that really force us to decide how we're going to get partners, get our clients in the room, get our peers in the room, get governing bodies in the room to sort of tackle this stuff. So we need to learn new languages and need to be really good at collaborating and integrating. So, some of you met Clive Greenwell last week or 2 weeks ago, at the same time you met the guy Josh, right, who did the fabulous bandage. When I met Clive, Michael and I sold Donovan and Green in 2000, in 1996, to a digital agency on the West Coast, 3 Apple guys. We loved their design, and we loved them. They were fabulous, and they hit the wall about a year later. This is 1996, 1997. They sold CKS to US Web, and US Web got sold to somebody else, and it became March 1st, which became the poster child for silly tech companies. They did a Super Bowl ad and went bankrupt, I think, a week later. Anyway, we were gone by then, but we did a lot of interesting things through the 2000s. So 2000, we left our company. It was really a shocking experience, to tell you the truth. Just to tell you how shocking it was, I have a good friend who's a good friend of Bruce Springsteen's, and she called me the day we walked out the door for the last time and left this office we built. And she said, "Would you like to come to a Bruce Springsteen concert in the Meadowlands and sit on the stage?" And I said, "No, I can't." I just don't have it in me. I mean, I can't believe it. I look back on it and think, what was I thinking? Anyway, but anyway, the point is that we did a lot of different things. You saw a few things, Michael, that he started a couple of really interesting companies.
5.
I went to work, became, for 18 months, it was supposed to be an 18-month assignment, to build a brand group for Zurich Financial Services, because they were becoming a global company from being a disaggregated company. Then I went to become CEO of Waterworks, and then I went to work for Clive at the Medicines Company. And at the Medicines Company, I walked into that place, and it was Clive. We had worked with him, both Michael and I worked with him in the 90s, doing this interesting work for Roche. But the thing that was incredible about Clive, which all of you who saw him last week know, is that he's a brain. He really thinks hard about the state of the world, the state of the pharma, the state of the health of the world, and what he can do to make it different than big pharma has made it. So he presents a very convincing argument about that. But one of the things that really blew me away was he'd spent a lot of time thinking about the literature, because he's that kind of guy who is, on trust. And what is trust? What is it? How do we build it? And we decided to put it up here because I think that trust kind of makes the world go around. And as designers and people who are asking people to do things like, trust me, this is the way you should go. What is trust? And he had 4 pillars. Competence. First of all, you have to be good at it. 2, you have to be consistently good at it. No up and down. 3, transparency, which means you know my process. I'm going to tell you everything. You're going to tell me everything. We're going to be in the boat together. And empathy. He calls it mutuality. I call it empathy, which is that I care about your experience as much as I care about my own when I'm doing this with you, when I'm collaborating with you, when I'm designing something for a body of people that I've never met. I need to understand, where are they coming from? They're different than me. Designing weight loss drugs, which was our last big hit. The people, I spent probably 50 hours listening to people talking about their journey with weight. Man, if that doesn't wake you up to thinking about stuff in a different way, because it's not just theoretical. This is people living this issue every day of their lives. And I think that notion of empathy and the notion of building trust and how you do it, I don't think we talk about it enough with students, for example, because I think people think that just because you're good at what you do, that you should be trusted. And the reality is that you earn it day in and day out in very specific ways. So this is yours. We loved it. We found this guy, obviously.
Well, I mean, I like all of you. We're experiencing this on a sort of minute by minute basis, right? And I said this a minute ago, but I'm convinced that AI will not eliminate designers. It'll just simply change our roles. And I know that here at Parsons, we're really working to make certain that our charges, our students, really have mastery of these tools. And I have every confidence that these young people are going to go into the world equipped to really deal with a world that is shifting, under everyone else. But I'm very confident that we're going to be able to manage this and give them the tools and experience that will really make them valuable and make them leaders. Because as I said earlier, some of the traditional roles of design really were about production. It was sort of the messy stuff that we knew how to do that our clients didn't. And that's why we got hired. Well, now that's been eliminated, thank you very much. So we can really focus on what's important. To that end, I have to say, again, this is sort of long arc. I was convinced at one point that one of the reasons we were getting hired is because we knew how to deal with sharp things and sticky things. and we could do that very handily when our client couldn't, Now, every client that anyone's ever going to have can open a platform, and whatever you think you just did, they can go in and mess with it, right? Anyway.
So finally, what changes and what doesn't? So Michael, you want to talk about the first?
Well, this is kind of an extension of this. I mean, really, the tools are going to change. The human needs one. The platforms have always changed, and they're going to continue to change. But clear and critical thinking will be ever more valuable.
And job titles are interesting because Clyde is convinced that everybody gets hired should just make up their job title, right? So I've been living with that for about 15 years now, like just make up your job. I don't care what you call yourself. The reality is that the boundaries are fluid. Clarity is so important, and yet, all of us are dealing with incredible fluidity in terms of planning, in terms of designing, in terms of knowledge, and existing business models will continue to change. But leading ethically and taking responsibility and really owning your place on this planet and finding the problems you really want to solve is really, I think, what we need to be embedding in our students, but also in our own psyches. If you're not happy with what you're doing, just do something else, right? Just sit back and think about it. I mean, I've been so impressed. I've been most involved at Parsons in the GEMS program, and I have been so impressed when I sit in these classes and hear what these students are doing. Mostly, I talk to career students, but they are students and they are learning and they're doing incredible things, and they're really trying to figure out how to change the world. And I think that's what the opportunity. I mean, I think people should want to come to Parsons and want to be a designer because designers really can change the world. And so our last slide is your next 50 years, because we're not going to be around for a few more years. Anyway, so we're happy to have a conversation, truly have a conversation, and talk with, answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much for such an inspiring and also beautiful narrative and stories. We were wondering before the event, like, how are we going to cover 55 years in 30 minutes? But here we are. So let's open up for questions and thoughts. I know we initially designed this talk to be geared towards students, but I was taking notes, as you can see. So I'd love to hear from both our students in the room and also our faculty members and industry professionals. Love to hear your thoughts. And introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Mark Randall, Assistant Professor of Design Strategies here. Your relationship with Massimo, and I used to work for Massimo Vignelli. And one of the things that I learned, which I could so see in all of your work, was one of my favorite quotes of Massimo's is, if you can design one thing, you can design anything. And that's the thing that I've always kind of that's made me be excited about being a designer. And it was so great to see that. I feel like you learned that lesson too.
The principles of design are the same. I mean, it's easy for me to say, I don't actually design that much. This guy is amazing. But we have had, architects and photographers and videographers and graphic designers, and all those people work in our firm and have worked in Donovan and Green over the years, and now work in. By the way, to finish the story, we started Donovan and Green again in the mid part of 2000. It kind of always went along, but we really earnestly started again in 2013 or 14 or 15. And I kept going out and doing the things I was doing, but Michael held down the fort, and a lot of the companies he started were within Donovan and Green. But about 3 years ago, Clyde Meanwell, who I've mentioned, started a private equity firm called Population Health Partners, and then at one point asked if we'd like to bring our little team into Population Health Partners and be an internal agency for all these companies they were starting in health. And we were thrilled to do it because we had kind of gotten to the point where we were doing a lot of work in health and felt very excited about that, because we felt it was an area that was filled with opportunity to really help people. And we started. We're just talking about James Wines and Allison, and Michael and I were all architects in schools back in 1973. And we worked in New Jersey, and then I worked a lot in the South Bronx, really changing schools with students and teachers. And I felt like I was doing God's work, And I think that starting there and ending there, like doing something you really think is going to make a difference in other people's lives, was meaningful to us, which is why we made that transition.
Well, Randall, you mentioned Massimo and Layla. In many ways, that was my first experience. And my second experience, right after I opened the company, I worked for a while by myself, and a colleague from Unimark, who was at the time Paul Rand's assistant. I mean, she was being paid by IBM to support Paul Rand. She was a very accomplished designer and a principal designer at Unimark. It went from Unimark to Paul Rand. But she called me up and said, what are you doing? And not much. I wasn't doing much. And she said, would you like to do an exhibition for IBM on the history of the computer? And I said, yeah, that sounds really great. And she told me what the budget was, which is about 8 times what I would have thought was appropriate. And she said, there's only one caveat. That my word, not hers. But she said, you have to work with Charles and Ray Eames. And I said, I can do that. That'll be all right. And so consider, a young guy thinking about how I'm going to live my life and what am I going to do. And I have Massimo and Layla Vignelli. And then I had a relatively intimate relationship with Charles and Ray. around this exhibition, because he was doing something else and he couldn't do it. Otherwise, he would have been doing it, I'm sure. But so that set us on a good path. But having sort of grown up, and I wouldn't say grew up in the Ames office certainly, but certainly in the Vignale office, and that notion that designers can really cover a lot of ground was really true. And in many ways, because of the two of them, Layla being a really successful architect and from an architectural family, a lot of the three-dimensional stuff was Layla's. And Randall, how many times did you hear, Massimo, you're so stupid?
Yeah.
Hi,
Hi.
Cynthia Lawson Jaramillo, Vice Provost for Research. Thank you so much for the very inspiring talk. It's so moving to see your life's work and practice together, very inspiring. One of my areas of interest is around slowness and how slowness really can establish the conditions needed for true environmental and social sustainability. And I was so moved by your description of these like giant machines and very tedious processes to create a multimedia design that can now be produced in seconds or minutes. And I wonder, as we reflect on that list of what skills we need to prepare us for the next 50 years, what are your thoughts on the temporal aspects of your practice, how that's evolved, and how we might bring some of that slowness to our students in our classrooms?
Oh my heavens. One of our biggest complaints, when we whinge about the fact that no one gives you time to think about anything, and I don't know if any of you ever read the book The Shallows by Nicholas Carr. My daughter had to read it when she went to Vanderbilt, and I read it at the same time. But he talks about the fact that Marshall McLuhan's, our brains will co-evolve with technology, right? Statement. This is that on steroids, is basically saying we're losing the capacity to think deeply because we don't read a 360-page book because it takes too long. And it is the depth and the laying out of the argument, over and over and over again, or all those things. I mean, I think that it's a bit reactionary to say we should slow down, but I think it's the most critical thing. We should be putting the brakes on all over the place. We've been involved in so many startups lately where it's madness, and they don't have quite enough money, they have horrible deadlines, and you have to do profound work, overnight. And I think we're losing a lot in that process. So anything that we can do to say to a particular generation of most of our students, slow down, take a beat, think, sleep on it, spend the night and don't think about it, and then come back and think about it again. I mean, that's where the real, I think, breakthroughs come from.
We actually embedded a kind of a process in the population of partners now, and it's go slow
To move fast.
to move fast. It's sort of looking at the Formula One model, where so much planning, years or months of planning go into a few hours, right, of performance. And that kind of preparation is what makes for a successful input or outcome. So.
Thank you very much. I'm David Lieberman. I'm Associate Professor of Media Management here. I'm wondering, when you got started, who are the designers who inspired you, and what did you learn from them?
Oh, well, that's a great question. And I was talking to somebody about that the other day, and I don't want to sound like an old fart, so I have to be careful. But, in many ways, that was what was so important about this community. And the people, the groups that we interacted with. So when we were starting out, first of all, the number of design firms that were really notable, you could count on two hands. In New York City, probably North America.
Well, New York City, there were about 10 to 15 of
Yeah,
us.
yeah. Shmai from Geismar. They hadn't started yet, right? So it was a while before Pentagram. Onspach Grossman in Portugal, Carbone Smolin, Siegel and Gale. Onspach, I mentioned them. Landor. Yeah, there weren't a lot. Tony Russell and a small thing. Milton Glaser, but yeah. And so you could be in the room with those people on almost any given night, and they were at every AIGA event. They all went to the Aspen Design Conference, and you laid on the lawn and talked about design and the world. And it was really a sense of kind of tribal belonging that was really great. And one of the things that we talked about was how you started following design almost like an author. You'd go sort of year to year. You'd say, "Oh wow, what they did this year, and look how they've changed." Or some of this had to do with topography and other forms of communication design. Because within a year they could be a lot. But it was there was a sense of community and community that I think was really precious. And I don't know what the replacement of that is. I'm not yearning for the golden days or the good old days or whatever, but I think that's really important to have these models and to have these relationships where you learn from each other and you take pride in each other's work. One of the things I'll say is that, we were kind of the new kids on the block. We were really the youngest by quite a lot. And we competed with some of those companies, but not always, not that much, because of how Nancye and I chose to work, which was looking for long-term relationships with CEOs and things. But if you were competing with like Ken Carbone or Ivan Shmaier, and they got the project and said, it was like good for them, because you knew that the outcome was going to be great and the whole, all those rise kind of thing. So we were all rooting for each other. It was nice.
Yeah, and I think what happened is that technology happened and the boundaries between things became more fluid. Now that's a real opportunity. It's not a bad thing, but it's harder to find your peeps. There are a few groups. We talked about First Tuesday, right? We're talking about different groups that got together to try to, make community. And that has happened, and I suspect it's happening now. I don't know where, and I think it's harder. And I think you find a lot more of that online, through social media. People get their fix in a different way, and it's not the same. Again, at the risk of sounding old, it's sort of nice to show up and actually talk to a person and exchange, physical ions with them, right? To really, you do. Having a face-to-face conversation is very different. Showing up everyone went to all the AIGA openings on 3rd Avenue, right? And you show up, you knew everyone was going to be there, and they became, those may be the only time you ever saw those people, but you were in the same room with Milton Glaser and Ivan Shmaier and, Saul Bass.
Saul Bass.
Right. And they became people that you looked up to and admired. And I think it's a little harder, it's a lot harder to have that, again, community today. And I think maybe it's through a university. I think it's a real opportunity for a university to kind of build that, and to have it be not just while you're in school, but really try to bring back people, because that sense of place and sense of belonging to something, sort of bigger than you are, is really a gift.
Thank you so much for this. I look forward to trying to be able to talk about 50 years of work in the way you did. It was beautiful. Thank you. I have 3 questions. You don't have to answer all of them, but they're... Oh, I'm Michelle Kahana, and I'm in the School of Design Strategies, and I'm a professor of practice in management and social innovation. So my first question, sorry, I'm hogging here, but there's so much that's exciting about this talk. One is, at a certain point, you were able to say no to projects, right? So I'm interested in how you thought through that, right? Using criteria that might be more than about, the sum of money you would get from it, but the things that you were trying to create in your legacy. The second question is, you talk about your sort of last 10 years of work in health and sort of what you're hoping to see in the design world around that. And then the third question, sorry, you don't have to take all, take one, but is sort of, we have we have an expectation of math literacy and, writing and English or speaking literacy, reading literacy. What's the case for design literacy at an early age at this point? Why would that be important? It seems to me that so much of what we need to be passing on to children is that everything that is this world is a social construct. We make it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll handle the no part. How do we say no? You take
It it was a requirement. I mean, from almost a survival perspective, we just intuited that we couldn't risk not having a good partner. I mean,
this project we did for IBM was I'm telling you, we made a ton of money. It was so not worth it. It was so horrible. And we felt like we worked so hard, made so much money for something that was useless. And it really was a terrible feeling. And all you have to do is do that once, at that level, and say never again. It was really a defining moment. And I do think that most of us humans learn through bad things better than we learn through good things, frankly. And a lot of pain.
Yeah. I mean, so it just seemed to us that what we were doing, I mean, we didn't have a grand vision about what we were doing, but we just wanted to be successful for them, for our partner. That was really what was driving us, was not our success, but their success. And, we just realized you can't be down in the marketing department stack, and affect a company. I mean, it doesn't happen. That's a project. That's not a relationship. That's not going to alter the course of anything. It's just another thing, And so it just became kind of elemental. I mean, this is how we're going to behave. And so we just navigated to an environment, as Nancye mentioned earlier, where we had those kinds of relationships, and we had them for 15, 20 years.
One of the ways we got rid of people is we wrote a proposal that said what we really meant. And people would say, nah, they're overthinking it, or it was a lot of self-selection. It wasn't like we said, oh, we're going to do this holy thing and, we're going to reject everything. We didn't have to. People didn't want us either because we wanted to do it a certain way. But I like your idea about design literacy because I think design literacy, critical thinking, scientific literacy, deductive, inductive, all that, it's all kind of the same in a way. You gather information thoughtfully, you set up a hypothesis, et cetera, right? And I think that teaching children to think critically and is what the reason that we're in the state we're in is because we haven't done that. We've let I think the root of all evil is bad education, frankly. And I think we've done such a bad job globally in educating children that we're now suffering from that. So I think that design literacy is just another name for a certain way of being in the world where you think in a certain way. And I think teaching, it isn't hard to teach design. I taught design to 5th and 6th graders in the South Bronx, and they got it really easily. That's not hard. What's hard is is giving kids boring things to do year after year after year after year, and they just tune out. And I think giving them remote learning is one of those boring things to do, and I think our kids went to Grace Church School, which is near here, and there was a wonderful woman who was head of the lower school. Her name was Meg Duchovny, David Duchovny's mother, Scottish, incredible woman. And she said there will be no computers in this school before the 4th grade. No kid will touch a computer before the 4th grade because your hands and your brain are like connected, right? And if you don't learn to take your brain, work with your hands, and take it back up again, you're not learning the same way. So anyway, I think we have a crisis in education. Yes.
Hi, Pietro, a student of strategic design and management here at Parsons. I wanted to ask you, because I read the other day an article about Massimo Vignelli and his work for the New York subway. And especially the map. And he designed this beautiful map, this new kind of map, and New Yorkers hated it a lot. It was very different. It didn't look like a regular map, especially Central Park was a square and the water was beige. So as like an aspiring designer now, I'm thinking, because Massimo basically said, okay, I think you're all wrong. My way is the right way. And now, years later, the map that we have now is much more similar to his idea, vision. So he kind of won the battle in history. But when I'm placed in that situation, where I'm like, I'm the designer, I have this idea, but then the client hates it. Since I'm not Massimo Vignelli, how can I know that? Normally, I just say, okay, you're the client. I'm just gonna do it your way, the way that you like it. I cannot. I don't have the time to change your word right now. So should I battle that, and how? If yes.
You were there.
Yeah, I lived that actually, because the original map was designed at Unimark with Massimo and Bob Norda, who came from Italy, where he had designed the Milan subway system first, and they really worked as partners. And I and a couple of the guys pushed 4 tables together, 3x6 tables, and a young woman, Joan Cherison, climbed up on that table and on her hands and knees every day, if you can imagine this is how it was done. She glued down with rubber cement every single freaking word, every station, every dot. It's all done mechanically by hand and shipped off, and that became the original subway map. And Bob and Massimo saw it not as a map, but as a diagram. They never called it a map, And Massimo said, "You're underground. What do you care where Central Park is? It's not, And he's right, of course. So that map was printed and published, and it was part of the whole Unimark system. And then the MTA had a designer actually working for them. Yeah, John. And he wanted a map that was a map and that was more accurate. And so he took it on himself and did that. And guys, it was this wonderful
Public hearings. I
mean,
mean,
it was
public
a Cooper
hearings.
Union. It was like where Lincoln gave his talk, right? And it was spirited, believe me. I mean, it was filled. It's like 10 times more people in that room than in tonight. Massimo and I were there side by side, and there was a panel, and they went back and forth on the logic of maps and diagrams, and it was kind of ridiculous, It was a fait accompli, but they were throwing us a bone or something, I think, the design community. And then they went ahead and published it, and then, ironically, that diagram showed up, I think they called it the weekend map or something, right, Randall? And then, yeah. And then later, now it's adopted. By the way, there's I don't know if you know this or not, but if you take the E train and you take it to 53rd and 5th, in that subway station, there's an entire exhibition on the development of the subway map and the graphic standards manual, and it names names and places, and it's really cool. It's been there for maybe 4 or 5 years, but and probably because Mildred Constantine, who was the director at the Museum of Modern Arts, and she was on some commission, said, when this project came about, she said, you should hire this Italian guy, Massimo Vignelli. He's a very good designer. So
Your question though was, what do I do?
Yeah, what do you do?
I'm not Massimo Vignelli, and I think that even if you were Massimo Vignelli, they diss the map, even though he was Massimo.
yeah, and
right? So-
that's, Massimo's sort of a, okay, I mean,
the truth is that if someone hires you to do something and they want it a certain way and you have to really decide, and this is hard, whether this is within the bounds of what you think is acceptable, that you can do that, or it's not within the bounds of what you think. Because some things that you're asked to do really are not answering the problem. And and the really hard question is, I know this is a bad idea. Should I do it anyway because they're paying the bill?
No.
And we all have struggled with that. We've all struggled. This is called being a grown-up designer, right? Where you don't take on things like you think are going to end in that place, but it happens. And I think that we have a few golden rules, like never show a design of anything that you don't like and wouldn't want to see. I mean, you don't show them the rejects. You only show them the 3 best solutions that you could live with any of them, those kinds of things. But yet you will still be put in positions. And I think we did finish that big IBM project that we were so miserable about, but we never worked with them again. So I think there's a certain amount of ethical duty to finish something, but there isn't unless it's really bad, right? But it doesn't mean you have to do it again. And I think I can't say that in 55 years we haven't had some heartache, some late night conversations about what do we do about this person or this client.
that whole notion of curation at the beginning.
Right. If
sort
you
of
can, weed
self-selecting,
them out.
It really is important because, the old adage, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him think.
Thank you.
I actually had a question. Ricardo Gonzalez, I'm also a graduate student in strategic design and management. I like what you said about curiosity is a privilege. Coming back to school, leaving corporate America and taking a minute, as someone said earlier, to slow down and think again is really nice. I was wondering what has kept you not taking that curiosity for granted for so many years.
Well, I read a ton of books.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, reading is I wouldn't want to retire and do it all the time. That would be boring. But I spend every minute I can, and I always feel grateful that I can learn about something that I know nothing about. And for me, reading is it. For some people, it's other kinds of input. But I think that whatever it takes, and I will say that the TED conference for many, many, many years was kind of was a defining moment for us because, we helped Richard plan it, and we met a lot of the people along the way that became TED speakers. And then we were at TED, and as Richard used to say, turn to your left, turn to your right. The people sitting next to you are as interesting as the people on the stage. I think put yourself in situations where you meet people who aren't like you. And I think that that's the kind of thing, and one can always do it. It's one of the reasons we're involved with the New School in Parsons, is that this is a place where ideas happen. And so, if you can come here and drink it in, and it's find your places, you never run out of time before you run out of places. Let's put it that way.
Hi, I'm Lillian Wu. I'm on the board of trustees. Well, you have met IBM. And you have met mathematics and computing. So I adore. I think you're talking about that big history of computing poster.
Well, this was an exhibition. When they had an
Oh.
exhibition space on 57th and Madison. Do
Yeah.
you remember that? It was in that space.
Okay, but there's probably that same linear idea
Yeah.
of history with multiple different histories, you
Yeah.
know, along with computing being the most important history, of course. So anyway, so I just we'll have to have a heart-to-heart talk about IBM.
By the way, we had a lot of great experiences at IBM. One of the most interesting ones was we came back many, many years later when we
Yeah.
had gotten to the older and wiser, and we had designed the board book for the IBM Board of Directors presentation. This IBM has tons of companies, and so there was a page for each company, and we did the information design into which they could plug the facts so that it was easy for the CEO to kind of read where is each company. And again, we did some very interesting things for IBM 20 years later,
Yeah.
but it was really more the point of like, who's the client? You want them to be informed and knowledgeable. And what happens a lot of times when you're not in a decision maker's role, it doesn't have to be the CEO, it can be someone else.
Yeah.
But they're taking, it's a game, it's like that game, kids' game of telephone. You know, they're taking information from somebody who's taking information from somebody, and everyone. And by the time you get the brief, it's like nobody likes it.
Right. But my question is, I've noticed that as your career has gone through time, it's and you've been focusing on life. And is it more difficult as a designer to design things that people find very personal when they interact with your design? That it's about them. They have it's about their health. It's about their mother, their dad. You know, does it feel different as a designer when you're designing in that capacity?
No, actually, I think it more closely aligns with what I consider sort of the essence of design, right? Where, you know, design thinking as a way of approaching problem solving is a little outdated now, I suppose. But the three tenets are start with empathy, which is knowing who you're working for, what's the problem to solve, and then in a collaborative way, it's fast iteration, and then fast prototyping, right? Where you put it out there and then change it again, something like that, right? And I think having the opportunity, I really feel like it's a privilege to be involved in these problems around global health, really takes all the skills that are embedded here and put them to the highest purpose. You know, I mean, as we saw from Clive's presentation, global health is probably one of the greatest crises we face from a humankind perspective. And so to be able to take all the skills that we have and engage in parts of that problem it's a life with purpose. You know, it really is. It gives meaning to our work collectively.
I think your question about the personal part is really interesting one, Lillian, because we have so much more capacity to get close to people than we've ever had before. If you're talking about solving a really big problem, like obesity in the world, which is now by 2030, 50% of the people in the world will be obese or overweight, and a lot of them will be children, right? So, and it leads to somewhere over 200 more other diseases. And this whole metabolic miasma, as we call it, which is stroke, heart attack, diabetes, et cetera, it really is scary what's happening. So if you think about, the problem is, how the food industrial complex, which is not what it's called, but that's what I call it, has really forced bad habits on people. It's not their fault that they're eating badly. We haven't provided education. We haven't provided the sustenance. We haven't provided, life has taken over. Mother and father are working. No one can buy. We have fast, easy, cheap fast food. And there are lots of things leading to this. But the awareness isn't there of like, what can I do about it? And I think that with all of the technology we have that can deliver personalized information, we went through that Boston Heart thing, but we were able to create 8 years ago a personalized health survey based on your blood work that said, you, Lillian, have this problem. This is what it means, and this is what you should do about it. I think that we have more capacity to use technology to get personal with people. So we're not just talking to everybody like a pharmaceutical commercial. We're actually talking to people through their wearables, through all sorts of things, saying, this is you, and this is how you can help yourself, and this is how we can collaborate to help you. I think we have more opportunity than we've ever had. Will we make the most of it? I hope so. That's why I'm very excited about Design for Health as a center of excellence or as a pursuit for us, because I think across all the disciplines, we can bring high touch to, whether it's through performance, and we know the power of music and creativity on the brain and so on. We know what designers can do, social scientists. We have everything here to really be able to tackle these very big problems and make them very personal. And I think that is the thing that we need to be fighting for.
My name is Marisa Moranjan. I'm the Director of Integrated Design within the School of Design Strategies. And thank you so much for the talk, which is informative, insightful, and charming, I'll add. And
Thank you.
I feel like your last response addresses my question about the value proposition that we have to offer here at Parsons. And I ask this of you because you have known it in many different capacities over a number of years. And I feel like we kind of touched upon it, and you were touching upon it throughout the talk and so forth. And so instead, I'll ask my second question, which is a burning question as somebody who is passionate about color. And when you opened the talk, you mentioned that you had riffs with each other about color. And so I'll shift my question before I turn it over to Joel about, I want to know what this debacle is about.
That's her problem, not mine. No, I think Nancye's more nuanced. She's far more subtle than I am. I think I don't know if it's, I would say over the years, I've developed a kind of a toolkit of preferences. And, I always try to push that, but I do fall back on super warm red I have a handful of hues that I feel comfortable with, and Nancye's always kind of a little more edgy and all that stuff. And so, look, this is not a big problem. You know what I mean?
But the metaphor in our lives is that we have a house in Chelsea. Some of you have been there. It's kind of modern. It's kind of mid-century-ish, and this has been a battle all the way along about I would be a little bit more decorative. He would be Massimo Vignelli, right? So the way I solve this problem is I collect Majolica, which is so colorful, and it sits in these white walls, right? And I think it's really wonderful. So we found our way to I love color. I don't wear it, but I love it. And so I really think that, and Michael has a toolkit, and I'm always looking for a new combination. So we've managed to get through it, partly because he always lets me get my way.
Okay.
No one knows who he is.
I'm just going to point out that Michael has a little stripe of red in his shirt. It's the only color that either of you are wearing. Michael's got a sort of dark blue to it. I agree with Marisa. You started to answer my question also with your last answer to Lillian's. comment. But I'm sitting here looking at the three of you, and I'm looking up at the screen about 50 years. And I've been listening, and then of course, the Rauschenbergs are behind you, and there's a cacophony between the screen and the Rauschenbergs that we're going to have to figure out. But it's impossible not to do the math. So I'm sitting here, I know you mean the sweep of 50 years, but I'm sitting here thinking about 2076 and what it means for design to be thinking today about 2076. And as you were presenting the sweep of the previous 50 years, it's reasonable to argue that the context changed around you. So maybe it's speed of change, maybe it's slowness, quickness, maybe it's technology. We were talking, Nancye and I were talking before about the difference of a kind of predictability versus a variability, that we're living in a time of tremendous variability. And when I think about 2076, that's what I think about. And so I'm curious, I want you to, and you answered it through health, and maybe that is for you the answer of how to think about design for health over that sweep of time, and what do we have to do today to start to get to a place where the intentionality can somehow resonate in a time of great variability. But you know I'm going to climate when I think of 2076. We know more or less what that world's going to look like. So help us think about design as a practice that's changing in relationship to a context we know is changing, but does not have us looking at it through a lens of fear or desperation, because none of your work is joyful. Your work is engaging, and you've navigated that shift. You see it in the kind of work in each of the decades. So can you help us with that?
You know, I keep thinking about zooming in and zooming out, you know, that you need to be thinking about somewhere in your mind is a future, but really you're dealing with today. Every day we deal with today. I think when you take in everything that's going on around you and you solve the problems that are in front of you, in your mind is, you know, am I doing this in a responsible way for some kind of future that I don't know yet? And as the CEO in my board meeting said, I used to plan for 2 years, now I can't plan for 3 months. The reality is we have to live in the present, but we can't be afraid that the things that we choose to work on, we may not see them in our lifetimes. You know, we may be doing this for our children. You know, we're in an odd position because I still feel like I'm 35 years old, right? And I sit in rooms where we're talking about a project, a big health project, and it's got a 10-year runway. And I think 10 years, God, will I even be, you know, where will I be in 10 years? Forget 50 years. But I think that it's very comforting to say, I'm going to work with the pieces on the table around me now, but part of my brain is going to be thinking, someone else will pick this up, you know, at some point along the way. And will AI, like the internet, they always used to say at TED conference, the internet is going to happen, but not tomorrow, right? You're not going to really see it. It took 20 years for anything really interesting to happen. And I think that it's going to happen faster now, but it may be 10 or 20 years before certain things are going to happen. But we have to believe that we're part of making that future, but we have to be in the now.
I think that's very well said. This notion of humanity and what we collectively bring to the table, I think, in that evolving context is really important to hold on to. And you know, one of the things that flashed by was a company that I started called Outer Places. You remember that, Joel? It was a digital publishing company called Outer Places, where science meets science fiction. And it was sort of like the crack to addict kids to science. And what we realized is by starting with science fiction, which is all about fantasy and envisioning, you could engage young people in science, and before they know it, they're scientists, right? Because it's so interesting and so engaging. And that business, that gave me an opportunity to look at the world. And I became, so we interact with people from NASA and scientists all over the globe. And it exposed me to this notion of how old the universe is, how old Earth is, how complex the human body is. The number of cells, the number of processes that happen in the human body is amazing. And you think, what kind of miracle enabled this to happen, right? And so embedded in all that is a kind of enthusiastic optimism, that we're going to muddle through. That I truly believe that the goodness in the human spirit will survive. And even if it's a glowing ember, not raging flame, at some point it will burst into. And there's two visions, and this is sort of the science fiction part about a world enabled by technology where we're free to contemplate all the spiritual things that might bring us comfort and pleasure, and that there's so much abundance because everything was so easy to make and cheap, that jobs won't be important. I don't know, but I don't think we're in a great place now, this little moment, but I think we kind of deserve it. I think you have to earn that kind of grace, and I think we've kind of given that up for a moment. I think we'll learn from these lessons, and I think the young people in the room will pick up the torch, and I'm very optimistic about 2076. We were at a dinner on Friday night, and we were all doing our very best not to talk about politics, our very best. But somebody kind of, couldn't help it. Well, what about the world? And I said, or what kind of world do we live in? I said, don't worry about the world. The world's fine. The world's had asteroids smash into it. We've lost entire species. We've had ice ages. We're only fine.
It's humans.
It's the humans that we have to worry about, and we'll probably be in colonies in space. Who knows? But so I'm optimistic. I'm sorry, I'm not going to see it.
Well, you never know.
I'm pretty confident, Joel.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us, giving these remarks, and your remarkable presence and service to our institution. We're so grateful, and we're so happy to be working with you in this moment together.
We're honored to be invited. Thank you very much, and thank you for showing up.